People think power always announces itself. They think it arrives with sirens, uniforms, medals, loud voices, and heavy boots. They are wrong. Sometimes, power wears a cheap red dress. Sometimes, it sits quietly in the back seat of a taxi. Sometimes, it keeps its mouth shut and writes your name in a report that will end your career forever. My name is Sarah Johnson. To the city, I am a police captain. To the department, I am a problem they pretend doesn't exist. And on that night, to the man who slapped me across the face, I was just another foolish girl. He learned the truth too late. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight back. I didn't tell him who I was. I let him finish digging. Because revenge, when done right, does not rush. I had been a police officer for 17 years. 17 years of blood on concrete. 17 years of radio calls that still wake me up at night. 17 years of watching good cops stay silent and bad cops rise faster than they should. That morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I took off my badge, not because I was ashamed of it, but because I wanted to see what the city looked like without it. I was traveling home for my cousin's traditional wedding. My family is African, proud, loud, deeply rooted people who believe weddings are not just ceremonies but declarations to the ancestors. For one day, I didn't want to be Captain Sarah Johnson. I wanted to be just Sarah. No escort, no uniform, no special treatment. Just truth. I wore a simple red dress, flat shoes, no jewelry, my hair tied back like any working woman heading home after a long day. I hailed a taxi on the edge of downtown, slid into the back seat, and watched the city through the window like a stranger. The driver glanced at me through the mirror. A tired man, late 40s, dark circles under his eyes, calloused hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Evening, he said politely. Good evening, I replied. We drove in silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. I'm going to take a different route today. I looked up. Why? He hesitated. The kind of hesitation people have when truth is dangerous. There's a road ahead, he finally said, lowering his voice, where police officers stop taxis. The sergeant there, he doesn't need a reason. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? I asked gently. He let out a bitter laugh. Tickets without cause. Threats. Slaps. Sometimes worse. If you don't pay, you don't go home. I stared at the back of his head. And the department? I asked. He shook his head. Who do you report a lion to when the forest belongs to him? That sentence stayed with me. We had driven less than 2 blocks when I saw them. 4 officers, 2 patrol cars, 1 man standing with his chest puffed out like the street belonged to him. Sergeant Tom Davis. I knew his name. I also knew his file had always been thin. No complaints that stuck. No body cam issues that survived review. A man who walked through investigations untouched. The taxi slowed. The sergeant raised his hand. My driver's hand started to shake. And that's when I knew I wasn't just observing anymore. I was about to become part of the story. Tom Davis walked up to the window and slapped the roof of the taxi hard. Out, he barked. Now. My driver swallowed and stepped out. You think this is a racetrack? The sergeant shouted. You own the road. I wasn't speeding, sir, the driver said quietly. That's when Tom slapped him. Hard. Then he turned toward me, and without warning, he slapped me too. The sound echoed louder than the traffic. The world went silent. I tasted blood, and in that moment, I made a promise to myself. I will not destroy you quickly. I will destroy you completely. Pain has a way of clarifying things. The sting on my cheek burned, sharp and hot, but it wasn't the pain that shocked me, it was the casualness of it. The ease. The comfort with which Sergeant Tom Davis raised his hand and struck a woman in public, in uniform, surrounded by his subordinates, as if this was something he did every day. Because it was. For a split second, instinct screamed at me to react. 17 years of training surged through my body. Muscle memory, defensive tactics. I knew exactly how to break his wrist, exactly how to put him on the ground before his officers even realized what had happened. But I didn't move. I didn't blink. I didn't touch my face. Instead, I lowered my eyes the way powerless people do. The way I had seen victims do hundreds of times when they realized the system standing in front of them wasn't there to protect them. Tom smoked. That smoke told me everything. You got a problem, girl? He asked. Girl, not citizen. Girl. The taxi driver gasped. Officer, please, she didn't do anything. Tom turned and backhanded him again, harder this time. Shut your mouth, he snapped. You want to spend the night in a cell. My fingers curled slowly into my palm. Inside my head, I started documenting everything. Time, location, witnesses, words used, force applied. This is how predators are caught, not by anger, but by records. You think you're special. Tom continued, stepping closer to me. I could smell coffee and arrogance on his breath. You women always think you can talk back. I looked up at him then, not with fear, with calm. I asked a question, I said evenly. Why did you stop this taxi? His eyes narrowed. That question, simple, reasonable, angered him more than shouting ever could. You don't ask me anything, he barked. I ask questions here. One of the junior officers shifted uncomfortably behind him. I noticed it. The slight lowering of the eyes, the nervous glance at the road. Good. Fear spreads. License, Tom said to the driver. Registration. Now. The driver fumbled, hands shaking as he produced the documents. They were clean. Perfect. I knew that the moment I saw them. Tom knew too. He glanced at them for barely a second before tossing them back at the man's chest. Doesn't matter, he said. You were speeding. I wasn't, sir, the driver whispered. That's when Tom leaned in close to him. If you keep talking, he said softly, your taxi will disappear. You'll disappear with it. I saw the man's shoulders sag. I saw a grown man fold in on himself, not because he was guilty, but because he was tired of fighting a system that always won. Tom turned to me again. And you, he said, smiling cruelly. You like watching? I met his gaze. Yes, I replied. That single word detonated something inside him. Before he could react, I spoke again, carefully, deliberately, loud enough for everyone to hear. You assaulted us. That's on record now. The word record made him laugh. Record, he repeated. This is my road. Then he did something I hadn't expected. He slapped me again. Harder. This time, my head snapped to the side. The junior officer flinched. I tasted blood again. And still, I did not fight back. Because now, it wasn't just about corruption. It was about control. Put them in the car, Tom ordered. Both of them. The driver looked at me, eyes wide with terror. I'm sorry, he whispered. I leaned toward him and spoke softly, so only he could hear. Do exactly what they say, I told him. And remember everything. We were shoved into the back of a patrol car like criminals. As the door slammed shut, I caught a glimpse of Tom Davis standing tall, chest out, enjoying the authority he believed no one could take from him. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. At the station, the humiliation continued. We were marched through the front doors in full view of officers and civilians alike. Tom made sure of that. Power likes an audience. Sit, he ordered, pointing to a hard wooden bench. We sat there. Minutes passed, then more. Tom disappeared into his office, leaving us there like discarded luggage. I listened. I watched. I memorized faces. Then I heard it. Tom's voice through the thin office wall. Yes, I told you already. That case is buried, he said into his phone. Nobody will look at it again. My jaw tightened. I don't care what he's threatening, Tom continued, as long as my payment clears. Payment. I closed my eyes briefly. This wasn't just street-level extortion. This was raw. I opened my eyes to find the taxi driver staring at me. He whispered, barely moving his lips. Why didn't you fight back? I turned to him. Because if I fight back, I said quietly, he wins today. He frowned. But if I wait, I continued, he loses everything tomorrow. He studied my face. Who are you? He asked. I leaned closer. My name is Sarah Johnson, I said. And tonight, I'm going to end his career. His eyes widened. You're police. I nodded once. Captain, I added. Silence fell between us. Then he whispered, Then why are you letting this happen? I smiled, not with joy, but with certainty. Because, I said, men like him only fall when they believe they are untouchable. Just then, the office door opened. Tom stepped out. He pointed at the driver. You, inside. The driver's face went pale. I squeezed his hand briefly. Remember everything, I said. As he disappeared into Tom's office, I felt it. The shift. The moment when a hunter mistakes patience for weakness and walks willingly into the trap. The door closed behind the taxi driver with a hollow click. That sound, soft, ordinary, felt louder than gunfire to me, because I knew what happened behind closed doors in places like this. I had sat on the other side of that desk before. I had interrogated suspects, comforted victims, and written reports that decided futures. I knew how power behaved when no one was watching. And right now, Tom Davis believed no one was. I sat still on the bench, hands folded in my lap, head slightly lowered. I looked exactly how he expected me to look. Defeated, silent, harmless. Inside, my mind was sharp as a blade. I counted seconds. I listened to footsteps. I watched reflections in the glass. From inside Tom's office, his voice rose and fell like a bully performing for an invisible crowd. You think I don't know your kind, he barked. Always crying poor. always playing victim. I heard a muffled sob. My jaw tightened. I could make one call, Tom continued, and you'd never drive in this city again. You understand me? The driver's voice cracked. Please, sir, I just want to go home. Home. That word does something to people like Tom. It reminds them of everything they don't desire but take anyway. I heard a chair scrape, then a slap, then silence. I inhaled slowly through my nose. In my head, I added another line to the invisible report I was writing. Physical coercion, threats of economic harm, extortion under color of law. Heavy footsteps approached the door. I straightened my back slightly, just enough. The door swung open. The taxi driver stumbled out, face pale, eyes red. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely keep them at his sides. Tom followed him, smiling. Go sit, he told the man. Then he turned to me. You're next. I stood, not rushed, not defiant, just calm. That calm irritated him more than anger ever could. Inside his office, the air felt heavier. The blinds were half closed, casting long shadows across the room. His desk was cluttered, files stacked carelessly, a coffee cup stained brown, a badge lying face down like it didn't matter. He leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms. So, he said, eyes roaming over me, you got a mouth on you. I said nothing. He chuckled. That silence won't save you. I met his gaze for the first time since the road. You called me in, I said evenly. Speak. His smile vanished. He stood abruptly, walked around the desk, and stopped far too close to me. You're brave, he said softly. Or stupid. I didn't step back. That, too, annoyed him. You think I don't know how this works, he continued. Women like you. You cause trouble. Then you cry when things get rough. I haven't cried, I replied. His face darkened. Maybe you want to, he said. Maybe you need encouragement. I saw it then. Not just cruelty. Enjoyment. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about dominance. He turned away, opened a drawer, and pulled out a form. Here's what's going to happen, he said casually. You pay $200. You walk out. You forget tonight ever happened. And if I don't? I asked. He didn't look at me as he answered. Then you'll spend the night in a cell, he said. And tomorrow, I'll decide what else happens to you. I let the silence stretch. I wanted him comfortable, confident. I wanted him careless. I don't have any money, I said finally. He laughed. Everybody has money. I don't, I repeated. That's when he lost his temper completely. He slammed the drawer shut and spun around. You think you can play me, he shouted. You think you're better than everyone else I deal with. He stepped closer. I didn't move. His hand rose, not to slap this time, to threaten. Say one more smart thing, he growled, and I'll lock me up. I finished calmly. Go ahead. He froze. Predators don't expect permission. For a long moment, he stared at me, trying to decide if I was bluffing. Then his mouth curled into a grin. Fine, he said. Cell it is. He yanked open the door and barked at an officer. Put her in holding. The officer hesitated. I saw it. The doubt. The flicker of conscience. Tom noticed too. Now, he snapped. The officer looked at me apologetically before escorting me down the corridor. The holding cell was cold. Concrete bench, metal bars, a smell of old sweat and forgotten hope. The door clanged shut, and just like that, I was alone. I sat down slowly. This was the point where most people broke. This was where fear screamed loudest. But I felt something else. Relief. Because now, Tom Davis had crossed a line he could never uncross. I closed my eyes and listened. Footsteps, radios, laughter from down the hall. Life continuing as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Minutes passed. Then I heard it. Tom's voice again. Louder this time. Yes, I told you already, he said into his phone. That judge owes me. I smiled faintly. Keep talking. Don't worry about her, he continued. She's nobody. Nobody. That word again. I memorized his tone, his words, the time. Then I heard something else. A different set of footsteps. Heavier, purposeful. A pause. A voice I recognized instantly. Where is she? The question was calm, controlled, dangerously calm. I opened my eyes, because I knew that voice, and I knew that whatever happened next, there was no going back. The footsteps stopped just outside the holding cell. For a moment, everything went quiet. No radios, no laughter, no movement, just the low hum of the station lights and the sound of my own breathing. Then the voice came again. Calm, firm, unmistakable. I asked you a question, the man said. Where is she? I didn't move. I didn't call out. I didn't even stand. Because the most dangerous moment for a man like Tom Davis is not when he is challenged by force. It's when authority speaks softly. I heard Tom laugh nervously. Sir, you must be mistaken, he said. We've got a lot of people passing through tonight. A pause. Then footsteps resumed. Closer. The shadow of two men stretched across the concrete floor outside my cell. One of them stepped into view. James Wilson, Deputy City Commissioner, my direct superior, and one of the few men in this department who still believed the badge meant something. He looked at me through the bars, really looked at me. The faint swelling on my cheek, the dried blood at the corner of my mouth, the calm in my eyes that told him everything. For just half a second, his expression changed. Shock, then fury, then something colder. What have you done? James asked quietly, without taking his eyes off me. Tom chuckled. Sir, it's just some troublemaker. Moody, refused to cooperate. James turned to him slowly. Open the cell. Tom frowned. Sir, I said, James repeated, his voice dropping, open the cell. The officer standing nearby hesitated only a second before unlocking the door. The bars slid open. I stood, not rushed, not dramatic. James took one look at my face and inhaled sharply. Sarah, he said. Tom stiffened. Sarah, he repeated. You know her? James turned fully toward him now. Do you know who this is? He asked. Tom shrugged, trying to hide the tremor in his hands. Some woman who thought she could. This, James interrupted, is Police Captain Sarah Johnson. The words landed like a gunshot. Tom's face drained of color. I watched it happen slowly, the realization spreading, the fear crawling up his spine, the certainty that something had gone terribly wrong. Captain, he stammered. No, that's not. She didn't. James cut him off. She didn't tell you, he said flatly, because she didn't have to. The room felt smaller suddenly. Tom took a step back. I didn't know, he said quickly. If I had known. That, I said calmly, stepping forward, is exactly the problem. He turned toward me. For the first time, he saw me, not as a girl, not as a civilian, not as someone he could intimidate, as a superior officer, as a witness, as a threat. You slapped me, I continued. Twice. His mouth opened, closed. You extorted a taxi driver, I went on, threatened his livelihood, assaulted him, took money under color of law. I was just, he stammered. And, I finished, you locked me in a holding cell without cause. James exhaled slowly. Officer, he said to the nearest patrolman, secure Sergeant Davis's weapon. Tom spun around. Sir, this is getting blown out of proportion. James stepped closer to him. You took a bribe on the phone, he said quietly. We heard it. Silence. Tom's knees visibly weakened. James turned to me. Sarah, he said, tell me everything. From the beginning. So I did. I told him about the taxi, about the stop, about the slap, about the threats, about the money, about the phone call. I spoke calmly, clearly, precisely, like a report, because revenge doesn't scream. It documents. As I spoke, officers gathered. Whispers spread. Eyes widened. Tom stood frozen in the middle of it all, exposed, naked, shrinking by the second. When I finished, James nodded once. Internal affairs, he said to an officer. Now. Tom found his voice again. You can't do this, he said desperately. I've served this department for 20 years. So have I replied. And I never slapped a citizen to remind myself who I was. The taxi driver stepped forward hesitantly. I'll testify, he said, about everything. James looked at Tom one last time. You're suspended effective immediately, he said. Badge. Gun. Tom's hand shook as he unclipped his badge and weapon. As they were taken from him, something inside him finally broke. This isn't over, he whispered to me. I leaned in just close enough for him to hear. It is, I said softly. You just don't know it yet. As internal affairs officers led him away, I stepped outside into the night air. The city lights flickered. Somewhere, people laughed. Taxis drove by. Life went on. But for Tom Davis, everything had already changed. Suspension is a strange thing. To the outside world, it looks like punishment. To men like Tom Davis, it feels like a warning shot, something they believe they can still outrun. As he was escorted out of the station, head lowered, badge gone, gun stripped from his belt, I watched his eyes. Not remorseful, not ashamed, calculating. He still believed he had friends. He still believed files could disappear. He still believed I would wake up tomorrow and decide this was too much trouble. That belief was his final mistake. I didn't go home. I went straight to work. James Wilson walked beside me as we moved through the quiet corridor toward the conference room. His jaw was tight, his fists clenched. How bad is it? He asked. As bad as it gets, I replied. And worse than what we saw tonight. He stopped walking and looked at me. You're sure? I wouldn't be standing here if I wasn't, I said. Men like him don't start with one slap. They build a system around it. James nodded slowly. Then we do this right, he said. No shortcuts. The conference room lights flicked on one by one. Officers were called in. Internal Affairs arrived with laptops, recorders, sealed evidence bags. The room filled with attention so thick you could taste it. I sat at the head of the table, not as a victim, as a commander. Record everything, I said, from the moment I entered that taxi. And so it began. I gave my statement, every detail, every word, every second. Times, locations, names, phrases, body language, patterns. Internal Affairs listened without interrupting. They knew. They had suspected. But suspicion without proof is just noise. What I brought them was structure. Then the taxi driver was brought in. Mike. He sat nervously, hands clasped together like he expected them to be slapped away. I met his eyes and nodded once. He straightened. They stop us all the time, he said quietly. Different drivers. Same road. Same man. How long? An investigator asked. Years, Mike replied. Everyone knows. That word again. Everyone. And the money? Another asked. Mike swallowed. Always cash. Always threats. Internal Affairs exchanged looks. Patterns were forming. Then came the footage. Body cams. Dash cams. Street cameras. What they found made the room go silent. Tom Davis stopping taxis at the same locations. Tom Davis leaning into windows. Tom Davis escorting drivers out of sight. Tom Davis returning alone. Over and over. Different days. Different victims. Same ritual. One investigator leaned back in his chair slowly. This isn't misconduct, he said. This is an operation. I nodded. Exactly. By dawn, the case had grown teeth. Search warrants were approved. Financial records requested. Phone logs subpoenaed. When they pulled Tom's call history, the room went cold. Judges, fixers, middlemen, a network. Tom wasn't the head. He was a gatekeeper. James rubbed his face with both hands. How deep? He asked. Deep enough, I replied, that if we don't finish this, it will finish us. By mid-morning, the commissioner arrived, then the chief, then city legal counsel. What started as one slap had turned into a full-scale corruption probe. I stood before them all. This is bigger than me, I said, and it's bigger than Tom Davis. If we stop now, we prove him right. Silence followed. Then the commissioner spoke. Proceed, he said. Full authority, full protection. That was the moment Tom Davis truly lost, because the system he thought belonged to him had turned its eyes on him. Across the city, officers were being called in, records pulled. Quiet conversations started ending abruptly. By afternoon, Tom Davis was no longer just suspended. He was wanted for questioning, and he knew it. I knew because my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. There was breathing on the other end. Then his voice. You think you won, Tom said. I know I did, I replied. You just made powerful enemies. So did you, I said calmly. You slapped the wrong girl. The line went dead. I looked out the window at the city skyline. 17 years. It had taken 17 years for this moment, and now that it had begun, there was no stopping it. Morning in the city has a sound, sirens in the distance, buses groaning awake, footsteps rushing toward places people don't want to be late to. That morning, the city sounded the same as always, but beneath it, something had shifted. Corruption survives on silence, and silence had finally been broken. By 6 a.m., internal affairs had moved from paperwork to action. Unmarked vehicles rolled out quietly. Phones rang behind closed doors. Officers who hadn't slept were handed fresh coffee and sealed folders. I stood in the operations room watching a digital map of the city light up with markers. Each one represented a stop, a name, a door about to be knocked on. James stood beside me, arms crossed. "You ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for years," I replied. The first arrest came faster than expected. A fixer, a man who handled paperwork, a man who made complaints vanish. When they searched his apartment, they found envelopes, cash, names, and Tom Davis's name appeared again and again. By mid-morning, warrants were signed for Tom himself, but Tom was gone. His apartment was empty, his phone off, his car missing. James swore under his breath. "His running." "No," I said quietly. "His panicking." There's a difference. Running is planned. Panic is sloppy. And Tom Davis had always been sloppy. He'd just never been challenged. At 10:17 a.m., a patrol unit spotted his car near the industrial docks. He was sitting inside it, alone, frozen. When officers approached, he didn't resist. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't fight. He just stayed straight ahead as the door opened and hands reached in. As the cuffs clicked around his wrists, something in his face collapsed. Not fear, emptiness. When they brought him in, I watched from the observation room. Tom looked smaller without the uniform, without the badge, without the road. He sat across from two investigators, hands cuffed to the table. "I want a deal," he said immediately. The investigator didn't blink. "You don't have anything to bargain with," he replied. Tom's eyes flicked toward the camera, toward me. He knew. Still, he tried. "I can give you names," he said. "Bigger names." I leaned toward the glass and spoke into the mic. "You already did," I said. He flinched. "You talked on the phone," I continued calmly. "On duty. In my presence. In a building covered in microphones." His shoulders slumped. For the first time since I'd met him, Tom Davis looked tired. "What do you want?" he asked. I thought of the taxi driver, of the slap, of the silence I'd swallowed. "I want the truth," I said. "On record. All of it." He laughed weakly. "You think that will save you?" "No," I replied. "It will save everyone else." The interrogation lasted hours. By the end, Tom had given them everything. Routes, names, amounts, signals, a system built on fear and cash. By sunset, the headlines were already forming. Sergeant arrested in corruption probe. Police department launches major cleanup. I finally went home that night. I washed the blood from my lip. I touched the faint bruise on my cheek. And I smiled, not because I was happy, but because justice had finally found its way back into the room. The next day, I stood in front of the department. Cameras flashing. Questions shouted. I raised my hand for silence. This case didn't start with an investigation, I said. It started with a slap. I let that sink in. And it ends with accountability. Behind me, officers stood straighter. Some looked ashamed. Some looked relieved. As I stepped away from the podium, my phone buzzed. A message from Mike, the taxi driver. "Thank you for seeing us." I typed back one sentence. I always did. I just stopped being invisible. And as I walked back into the building, I knew one thing for certain. Revenge doesn't always look like anger. Sometimes it looks like truth walking calmly into the light. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old leather, but beneath that there was tension thick enough to choke. I walked in wearing my uniform, not for authority, but for the reminder that truth wears many faces. The jury, the judge, the lawyers, even the spectators seemed to sense something different in the air. Something that whispered, today, justice would not be denied. Tom Davis was already seated. He looked smaller than I remembered, though his arrogance still tried to hide behind a forced scowl. Handcuffs remained a faint echo of the night before, a symbolic reminder of how quickly power could vanish. As the prosecutor began, he displayed a timeline of every action Tom had committed, the traffic stops, the threats, the bribes, the intimidation. Each slide on the screen was backed with evidence, body cam footage, witness testimony, phone logs, and my own report. I watched Tom's face change with each piece of evidence. First disbelief, then panic, then the realization that his empire of fear was nothing more than a fragile facade. When my turn to testify came, I walked to the stand slowly, deliberately. Cameras captured every movement, every expression. Every eye in the courtroom followed me. I told the story from start to finish. The taxi stop, Tom's assault on Mike and me, the extortion, threats, and bribes, the phone conversation, how I stayed silent in the moment to collect evidence and ensure justice could be served. The courtroom was silent. The judge leaned forward, listening intently. The jury scribbled notes. Tom's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge reminded him sharply, "Order in the court. This is evidence, not argument." Mike, the taxi driver, took the stand next. His voice trembled at first, but as he recounted every detail, he grew stronger, more defiant. Every word corroborated my testimony. Every word built a wall around the truth that Tom could no longer escape. The prosecutor closed the case with a statement that carried the weight of years of oppression and corruption. "Ladies and gentlemen, the law is not a tool to be wielded for personal gain. The law is protection for the innocent. Tonight, you have heard a story of courage, of abuse, and of one officer who refused to let fear dictate justice. Sergeant Tom Davis's actions were not mistakes, they were crimes, and the time for accountability has arrived." The jury deliberated. The air was thick with suspense. I felt it pressing down on my chest like a storm waiting to break. Hours later, the foreman returned. The judge called the court to order. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked. "Guilty on all counts," the foreman said firmly. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Tom Davis slumped into his chair. His world had collapsed, and the reality of his crimes now faced him squarely. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in prison, fines, and permanent dismissal from the police force. The ruling was clear: no badge, no excuses, no escape. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: satisfaction. Not vengeance, not rage, but the quiet power of justice fulfilled. Mike approached me afterward, tears in his eyes. "Captain Johnson, thank you. You saved me, my family, and everyone like me," he said. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't need saving," I replied. "You needed the system to work for you. And today, it did." The story spread. News outlets covered every detail. Headlines celebrated the courage of an officer who refused to compromise her values, and a system that finally held one of its own accountable. But I knew this was only the beginning. Corruption is a hydra. It always grows new heads. Yet, for once, one head had been severed cleanly, and that, in itself, was worth everything. As I returned home that night, I paused outside my family's house. Lights glowed warmly inside. Music floated through the air. My cousin's wedding awaited, a celebration of life, family, and resilience. I smiled faintly. Revenge, when wielded correctly, does not scream. It whispers quietly through the halls of justice, leaving no escape for those who thought themselves untouchable. And that night, I finally stepped inside, no longer Captain Johnson to the city, but Sarah, a sister, a woman, a survivor, and a protector of truth. The city never looks the same after a storm passes. By the time I returned to my routine patrols, whispers followed me wherever I went. Not just about me, but about what happens when someone in power forgets that the law is bigger than them. Tom Davis's arrest made headlines. Videos of his arrogance and threats circulated online. The taxi driver, Mike, became a symbol of ordinary people standing up to oppression. And me, I became a reminder that patience, planning, and courage can topple even the most corrupt. But the lesson didn't stop there. People reached out, victims of harassment, officers tired of looking the other way, citizens afraid to speak. They all wanted one thing: justice. And now, they saw that the system could work if someone dared to fight for it. I returned home that night, the wedding in full swing. Music, laughter, the smell of food. It was ordinary life. But I had a secret. I had been the quiet storm behind the headlines, the one who recorded, documented, and finally ensured accountability. And as I watched my family celebrate, I realized something important. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks quietly, unnoticed, gathering strength. And when it finally strikes, it cannot be ignored. The slap that tried to humiliate me, that tried to scare me, became the spark that set justice in motion. It reminded me that power without accountability is dangerous, and courage without planning is wasted. I smiled at Mike across the room. He caught my eye and nodded. No words were needed. Justice had been served. Truth had won. And that is a story worth telling, over and over. Friends, remember this. Sometimes the smallest act of patience, watching, documenting, staying calm, can change everything. One day, it could save you, someone you love, or even an entire city from corruption. This is the story of a single slap that exposed corruption, abuse, and a web of lies in the police system, and how one woman's patience and courage brought justice to the city. Watch till the very end to see the shocking moment he realizes his power is gone forever. If this story shocked you, hit like, subscribe, and share. because truth deserves to be seen.